Review of the school transport scheme that happened a few years ago was very welcome. It was badly needed. It did take a long time, but it was eventually published about 18 months ago. And it made a number of recommendations about reducing the distance that you had to live from your school to avail of school transport, and also that you had to attend your nearest school. And I suppose I was expecting that some of the recommendations might have been implemented for this school year, and maybe we wouldn't have the same amount of problems going when the schools resumed. But unfortunately that was not the case, because none of the recommendations have been implemented as yet, and I know there's a commitment given that they will be by 2030. But I mean, there were 14 pilot projects launched last year, and again, there doesn't seem to be any increase in those, and they're not being reviewed yet, which is disappointing, because I really think if they're looked at, the pilot projects, they're a good idea to integrate, school transport with other transport routes that exist in the community, like Local Link, etc. So I still had parents contacting me whose children didn't get tickets at the last minute, who are concessionary tickets, who got them for the last number of years, didn't get them for this year. I know senators have been talking about that you register for a ticket as you start school and you get it for the 8 years, but that can only happen if the capacity in the system is increased, because at the moment not all students who register get tickets because there just isn't the capacity there. I mean, we also have to say there's a lot of movement as well because of the housing issue, and families regularly move and have to re-register for tickets. I did raise with you last week, Minister, about the situation in Belturbet, so that's ongoing obviously, and I'm hoping that you will be able to assist in some way in helping those students get to school where they're not having to pay huge amounts of money every week on a private provider. But I also have another situation where there's two boys in the family attending a secondary school. They applied for tickets. They were told they're eligible, but there's no service so they should be entitled to the remote area grant. Now, Bus Éireann is claiming that they applied late and therefore they're not entitled to the grant this year. However, last year the older of the children applied because he was starting school. He applied for a bus ticket, was told, yes, you're eligible, but there's no service, but he was never informed that he was entitled to the remote area grant. And it meant that he was able to get a lift with a neighbour to the school last year, but that neighbour now has finished school and is no longer travelling. This is a single parent who does not have transport. She's on disability allowance. She can't afford to pay for transport to the school, and as a result they are missing out on school. Now, I have emailed you the details, and perhaps again if it could be looked at, but the point I was making is even if she was late in applying for whatever reason this year, if I've come across situations where parents have been late in applying before, and Bus Éireann will say, well look, when everybody else is catered for, we'll see if there's any room on the bus for you, and so some students who did apply late will still end up getting tickets. In this instance, if you're relying on a remote area grant, you're being discriminated against because you're not considered if you're late. Another situation where a student was getting his concessionary ticket, a bus passing basically the front door going to the school, but the school he was going to was not his nearest school. Then he lost his ticket. If he was to go to his nearest school, he'd have to walk a number of miles to get the bus to that school. But the bus to the school wasn't even his second nearest, because he would have been entitled to the ticket there as well. It was his third nearest, but all of the schools were relatively similar distances. But it just, again, it's the poor organisation that he couldn't actually attend that school that the bus was going by the front door to. I also felt a lot of parents got very short notice of either a service that wasn't running, and I know sometimes things can happen that a service has to be pulled at the last minute, but either that and also that the fact that their student didn't succeed in getting a ticket this year. And I actually thought the registration process might have started earlier, and it didn't. It started at the same time as every other year, was the 26th of April, I think, or the 25th of April or something like that was the closing date. So I just thought maybe if that could be brought back a few months, then Bus Éireann and the department would be aware of exactly how many students are applying for school bus tickets. Bus Éireann were before the Committee on Education and Youth prior to the recess, and we were talking about school transport. And I asked the question, how much of the fleet, of the buses that actually bring students to school are owned by Bus Éireann? And they told me 5%. And I was actually very, very shocked. 5%. I thought they might have said 50% or something like that. 5%. So 95% of our school transport is reliant on private operators. And I mean, I know Bus Éireann find it difficult to get operators. I'm not surprised when it's actually that amount. So, I mean, one question I did ask is there an intention to invest in the school fleet? Because if we're to increase the capacity by 100,000 as is stated by government by 2030, we're going to have to find buses somewhere. And I think to invest in it, but have an integrated system. I always thought it was a waste to have school buses dropping children to school, like to secondary school and primary school, and then they sit at home doing nothing for the bulk of the day, and then go back at 3 o'clock to pick them up, and 4 o'clock to the secondary school, and that was it. I mean, an integrated system where, yes, they do the school bus runs, but also provide other local link services would be a better way to go. I mean, and I know you've talked about drivers age 70 and having to retire as well, and I mean that's something that I would support being looked at. Transport for Ukrainian children, I know, was put on with special transport when we had children coming from that country, and I'm just wondering, could that not be integrated? Because I've known of families who the bus collecting the children from Ukraine who were living in the community going to the school was going by their door, and they had no transport, and there was space on the bus, and yet they couldn't use that bus. So I mean, and I think it's better for the children anyway. They're attending the local school; they should be integrated in as much as possible. And the last thing, I suppose, there's a significant amount of money spent on bringing students with additional needs to schools, and okay, that's in some cases is necessary, but in all cases necessary, but in many cases the children are travelling long distances. And if we could see, and as Minister for Special Education, you know this better than I mean, if we could see more special classes opened in schools that children didn't have to travel long distances past their nearest school to get the education that they need, the most appropriate education, then perhaps they would be able to use the school transport. Thank you.